Have you ever thought about your animals outside in the wintertime or such? Should we put a coat on them? Well, today we're going to be talking about that on a new show called Farming in Ohio. Hello everyone, welcome to a new show called Farming in Ohio. Today we've got Chris Bruynis here from the Ross County Extension Service. Chris, good morning, and how are you doing today?
Hey, good. Great to be here. Excited for this opportunity to share some ideas about farming and agriculture with people that may not be farmers.
That's right. So, Chris, tell me just a little bit about yourself and how long you've been at Ross County and stuff before we get into this slideshow.
Well, I grew up on a dairy farm in southern Ohio. Stayed there until I was 32, then went to work for Ohio State University Extension, first up in northern Ohio and now in Ross County since 2011. And so my whole career I've worked in the field of agriculture, natural resources, education, or in production.
Wow. That's really good. That's really good, and such a great asset for Ross County, and really almost the whole state with your expertise.
I figured out the other day that I think I've taught in 63 of the 88 counties now.
Really?
So it's
you're getting there. You're getting close.
I've been around, yes.
Yes. Well, Chris, you said we're going to talk about today. So the animals outside. So in particular, cattle, maybe horses or something like that, but really cattle.
Sure. Well, we're going to talk about cattle, but I think the same principles apply to most all livestock that are staying outside during the winter.
Okay. So we've got a slideshow, so let's go ahead and get into this.
Okay. You know, I have this picture as I was putting this together, and most of us want to attribute human characteristics to animals that are outside in the winter. We see this individual's bundled up in a snowstorm and it all makes us feel cold. And then we go to the next slide here. I picked out a little dog out in the snow. And again, this dog isn't necessarily bred to live outside in the winter. We do have some dog breeds that are, but we've started through a lot of media campaigns trying to give human characteristics to animals. And so I picked another picture, and nobody ever thinks about taking a polar bear inside and keeping them warm and cuddly for the wintertime. They think they belong out in the snow, they belong out in the cold. That is their natural habitat. So when we come to cattle, again, what does this make you think of? Are these cattle comfortable? Are they cold? Are they happy? You know, all these attributes, and what we'll find out as I cover this over the next 20-30 minutes is that livestock are perfectly fine to be outside in the winter time, especially cattle, and that's what I'm going to focus on here today. I've pulled up some research that's been done throughout the United States from different universities, and we'll look at what that says. And so the first thing, you know, coat condition, and here's where we get in trouble sometimes. If we've kept an animal in a barn and we've kept that temperature elevated, and then we want to put them outside and they've really not had time to adjust, it kind of reminds me of when we have that first warm day in the spring and it's 50 degrees, everybody's out in short sleeves and shirts saying, wow, how warm it is. But that first 50 degree day in the fall, everybody's got their coats on saying how cold it is. And so, you know, we can adjust our bodies to the temperature, and cattle that stay outside year round do that. Their hair grows thicker, their hide thickens up a little bit. And so if we think about that cow with a dry, heavy winter coat, 18 degrees, they're comfortable. And, you know, for us, that's still pretty chilly. Now, in the summertime, they shed their hair, and 59 degrees is when they start thinking about, maybe I need to eat a little bit more energy to stay warm. And so there is research out there that coat condition and the thickness of that hair really does help them protect against the winter. And so they're cold tolerant and they're comfortable. Again, we saw that 18 degrees in the previous slide. This one says 20 degrees. But what this slide really wants to tell us is we need to protect cattle against wind. Just like the wind chill, we hear the news reporter on the radio or on the TV talking about wind chill. Wind chill affects animals as well. So on those real cold, windy evenings or nights, we need to think about how can they get in out of the wind, and there are several ways to do that. The picture that I showed earlier of the cows out in the pasture, they live out there year-round, but they have several groves of trees that they can get behind and clear around, depending on which way the wind is from, so they can get out of that wind. And we notice that if we can get the wind calm or down to 5 miles per hour, we can really push that temperature to negative degree numbers, and the cows are still comfortable. So I just give a couple examples here. We think about the physical environment of that animal. We can make homemade windbreaks. The one on the right there, that's a windbreak that's made out of guardrails, and it's portable, probably not real light, but it is portable. We can do it out of bales of hay, anything that slows that wind down. We can plant pine trees, we can have natural groves of trees, or we can build a shelter such as a barn. And so I think the next slide I have, oops, one slide off here, we're going to go to that same physical environment and think about mud. We have a day, we're recording this on a day that it's 60 degrees and raining, and as I drove over here this morning, I noticed that a lot of the cows out in the pasture around their hay feeders and their forage feeders, it's getting pretty muddy. It's going to get sloppy pretty fast. And so they did some research, and they talk about loss of gain, or how much more energy, which typically we think of as corn, a cow needs to eat to be able to maintain. But this one, they were just looking at how much does a cow's temperature go up as a result of mud. And so again, if we're just dew claw deep, basically ankle deep for a cow in mud, 7% loss of gain, and then if we take about shin deep, I guess that would be a way to call it knee deep, 14%, and then it goes up pretty deep. We don't like to see cattle that's hock deep in mud or even belly deep, but there are occasions that it does occur, and we just have to realize how much more energy that we'll need to feed that animal to survive that, or we're going to have loss in body condition. So there's things that we can do to manage mud. We can improve drainage, at least pick a well-drained location. I'm going to come back to that earlier cow herd that I filmed, and it was a picture here in a minute, but that's on the top of a crest of a hill. And so, the water runs away from there. And so we're not going to do this where water stands, where water puddles. And so think about where we're putting that feeding location out in the pasture. And then we can also use things like straw or corn stubble or wood chips, corn cobs, to put in those muddy areas, to build kind of a mound to keep that animal dry and not having to walk through that mud. Geotextile cloth and gravel, and that's what they have on the feeder, I'll show here in a minute, is a more permanent solution, but it also is a little more costly. And again, the farm I grew up on, we use concrete everywhere, but that's quite pricey, and so it depends on your time horizon and the size and scale of your operation if you want to go down that path. So here's just an example of a lean-to. It's open on one side. It's got a straw pack in there. This was a day about 20 degrees outside. This was 10 o'clock in the morning, and you noticed no cows in there. They all decided to go out and walk around the exercise yard that they have there for them, and so they weren't interested in being inside, and that kind of speaks to the issue that cattle don't necessarily want to be inside. They like being outside if they're conditioned for it.
Now, Chris, I'm going to stop you there just a second if you don't care. On that lean-to, would you want to make sure that it's the open face in a particular direction, say north, south, if at all possible.
Oh, absolutely. And again, you need to make it possible. It has 4 sides. You can choose which side you leave open.
Yeah.
The prevailing wind typically comes from the southwest. And so, you would want that opening to the east.
Okay.
More than likely, just to prevent that. So if we do have those windy days, it provides as a windbreak versus a wind trap.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at is if at all possible, you want to also be able to make sure you build that structure the right direction.
Absolutely, absolutely. It makes a big difference. Well, I mean, also, if you have that one side open and you have it facing the wind side where the major storms would come in, you're going to blow all of that snow or all that rain into that, and then that's going to become a wet, soggy mess. And so, facing that correctly is critical.
Okay.
And so we're going to go back to thinking about this cow and this cold weather. And again, a cow's feed intake will increase by about 20%. And that can be a variety of things. If you have round bales out and they can eat all they want, you'll notice that bale is going to be gone quicker as the temperatures get cooler. They need that extra feed intake. And let's just call that calories. That's something that we understand, right? They need those extra calories to keep their body warm. And so if we start thinking about that, we need to either supply more. I mean, I grew up on a farm, still we use small square bales, and instead of putting out 10 for the herd, you might need to put out 12. You need to factor that in. If we have continual cold weather, they'll need approximately an extra pound of corn for every 10 degrees of cold stress below 20. We talked earlier that 18, 20 degrees with a nice winter coat for their hair coat was appropriate. And so if we get colder than that, we need to think about that. And the reason we say corn has higher levels of energy. And as your body processes that or as it is digested in the system, it'll create more heat.
Okay.
And so again, extra 10 pounds of hay or an extra pound of hay isn't going to get it done. So we need to think about that corn as more energy. And then the other thing that we want to mention here is minerals. Most of the farmers that I know that have cattle, they're either doing a total mixed ration where they're putting in the corn, they're putting in the mineral, and they're feeding that so every mouthful that cow consumes is balanced nutrition for that cow.
Nice.
But you can also put it out free choice. And again, depending on where your cows are living. If they can get out of the wind and they're in a barn, they don't get wet, and that's the big thing about permanently be out on pasture. We get some wetter weather, especially if it's close to freezing. That affects that ability of that animal to stay warm, and then they specifically need more feed.
Okay. Now, in the wintertime, like that, for that feed purposes, you generally feed like so much per pound for a large cattle versus small cattle?
Yeah, I mean, consumption will change depending on a couple things. The size of the animal, the body condition of the animal. We try to have, especially beef cattle, we try to have them in good condition going into the winter. They're typically now in their last trimester of pregnancy, so we need to think about growing that calf. And so there's all kinds of things going to affect what that correct amount is.
Okay.
If we're in that second trimester, if we're calving in March, we got into that last trimester here at the end of December. And so from before December, those cattle that are in that second trimester, they're not raising a calf. Typically average quality hay is all they need.
Right.
But now we're getting closer to calving, or if we have calving season starting in January, I know some calves that have been born already this year. Now we're trying to raise that calf too, and then it becomes even more critical to get the right amount of energy, not only because we need to keep the cow warm, but they also need to produce milk, and they have all these other demands. And so we really don't want them to lose body score.
Nice. Okay.
And so I've just got a picture. This is that same feedlot where I showed the straw pack, and here they're just feeding corn silage on this particular farm. They've chopped up the whole corn plant, and so we have the corn in there, so that provides energy. And this can supplement hay. They still have free choice hay, but they get a certain amount. If you look in the bunk, there's feed left, and they clean that up every day. But he ran this just for me to create this example of a feeding system that's out there in terms of one example. And if you can see around the lot there, this is a concrete lot, and it's a feed lot. And so here he's not keeping cows. He's feeding steers out for meat production. And so, it was just an example of how that works. And he ran a little bit more in the bunk, but it gets cleaned up every day. And then if they don't have enough corn silage, you want them to eat some hay. You don't want to have a 100% corn silage diet. And so this is just one example. Now I have another example here that I wanted to show. And this here is that same pasture where I was showing earlier. This is a total mixed ration. That's just a concrete bunk that's sitting there, and it has gravel and geotextile cloth on both sides. I thought it was interesting. Farmer's comment meant if I had to do it again, I didn't make it wide enough.
Right.
But you always figure out what to do later.
You always have to adjust.
But again, every day he also then comes out with a tractor and his feed wagon and puts feed in for these cows, and they also have all the hay. But this has the minerals and the corn and everything mixed in, so that every bite is the same. And as you can look, those cows are in good shape. I walked among them. They're docile. They were tame, and
they look very happy.
They look very happy.
Yep, absolutely.
And I don't think we got to 28 minutes.
Oh, we've got lots of questions we can go through for sure.
So I pulled some resources there if somebody's interested in that, just some places to go. And if you Google cold stress on cattle or weather management of cattle, you can find a lot of different resources. Some of them are in trade magazines, and some of them are university publications. I tended to go for the university publications, which is where your trade magazines get their information. But also we know that it's well-designed research. It's not, I hope this is true. And so I always like to look at university research because there are protocols that are in place that we follow that makes the research valid.
Right. Absolutely. So back to that feedlot, Chris. So I know there's various ways that people use feedlots, like that one that was totally automated, versus one where the tractor, your guy goes out load it up and goes through the bin and stuff. But what about the ones that just have those 4 or 5 cattle and they just use a scoop? I mean, is that's still serving the same purpose? They just throw it out there on a small, bin or whatever you want to call it. We should still do the same thing. I know them bigger farmers, they use a more automated stuff, and it's all
sure. But the principle is the same. I mean, whether I have 1 cow or 1,000 cows, the principle is the same. As the weather cools off, we don't need to put them inside and turn on a heater and keep them warm like we would like to do for ourselves. They're perfectly capable of living outside. And so, if I have 1 cow, I still need an ability for that animal to get out of the wind and find shelter. It would be ideal if we could keep them from getting rained on, but again, that's not necessarily critical. But if we know we're setting up a situation that they're either going to be wet for a couple days, like today and tomorrow, or if it's going to be colder than 20 degrees, then we need to think about, we need to feed them more. And typically it's corn. Right. I mean, there's other products out there. It can be DDGs, it can be wheat, it can be. But typically here in Ohio, it's corn. We need to give them more energy so that as their body digests that energy, it produces more heat. I think a good example is, if we overeat, a lot of times we can feel our body temperature elevated as we digest that. It's doing the same thing, same principle in the cattle. And so we just need to give them more energy. But if it's 20 degrees or above, all the hay they can eat is very adequate for a cow.
Okay. What about these mineral blocks and things that you see out? Should you continue to keep them out during the wintertime, or salt blocks or things like that?
Absolutely. A lot of times when we want to keep that out year-round, we want to think about the elements and keeping them. And so, that might be, if we're putting free choice mineral, which is usually a loose product versus a block, we're going to have a roof over that because that get rained on and it becomes a mess. Lick tanks, they can be open. Mineral blocks, such as the hard ones, they can be. I see a lot of people that'll use an old tire and a rim and throw it on that.
Yeah.
Keeps it up off the ground, keeps it drier. If it gets rained on, you might lose a little bit, but it's inconsequential because it doesn't rain every day.
Right. Yeah.
And so, keeping the minerals so the animal then can choose how much they consume, and they're pretty smart about that. They know when they need salt or they know when they need, and so putting that out for them year-round is a good practice.
Okay, so just making sure that it's out there. We don't necessarily have to add more. It's just a block. They'll eat what they want.
Well, you have two choices. I mean, 1 or 2 or 10 cattle or even 20 cattle, I'm better put it out there free choice. Now, if I've gone to the expense and I have 200 cattle, like the herd with the total mixed ration that I showed, the amount they'd have to keep out free choice and access to that. And so we can calculate what that need is for that cattle and then put it into that total mixed ration. And so they consume it no different than you and I taking a multivitamin every day.
Okay, gotcha. Now I got another question. We talked about feed. What about water? I mean, obviously an animal should have water year-round at any plenty. But during the wintertime, we have to take extra precaution to make sure it's not frozen or things like that. Is there anything out there for that?
Well, yeah. I mean, this particular herd, they're and again, right or wrong, environmentally friendly, environmentally not friendly. We're not going to go down that path. But this particular herd, they have access to a stream that does not run dry. Okay. And because it's running water, it doesn't freeze. And so they can get in there to take a drink. Now, if we fenced out the streams just for environmental concerns, then we need to provide water. There are all kinds of different options out there depending on size and scale of the operation. We can go with an open tank with a floater heater that fills up automatically. We can go with the Marifount, and that's just one brand name. But they have the balls and the cows push down to drink. Again, you'd have to bring water to it. But a mature cow will drink 40 to 50 gallons of water a day. And so clear, clean water is really critical. In the wintertime, we don't have trouble with mosses and growing into tanks. In the summertime, that becomes more of a problem. Becomes more of an issue. And so we need to make sure to clean it out more frequently in the summertime. But we need to check that in the wintertime, because if we've got a place for them to drink and it's open, just like the feed bunk that I showed, before he put the feed in, he went down with a shovel and cleaned the manure out because they sometimes stand in the wrong spot. And same thing can happen to water. And so we need to make sure we're checking that, making sure that it's clean and fresh. And like I said, they will drink a lot of water.
Okay. Great. And then one last question about water. We're getting close to the end here. Is there anything that we should put in the water? Any kind of minerals or anything like that in the wintertime versus summertime?
No.
Kind of like just straight water.
Just straight water. I mean, we don't need to purify it. We are finding in some dairy herds now that we're getting too much iron in some of our groundwater, especially in northwestern Ohio, and so they've had to filter some of that out. And that's not a cheap process, but we just typically our rainwater that ends up in our ponds and our streams are fine. And if we're pulling water out of the ground and pumping it to them, here most of the state, that's fine. We don't need to be adding, but if we get something, if we have cattle, we start seeing hoof problems in dairy cattle. If they get too much iron and sulfur in the water. Oh, really? And so, again, if we're having some problems with our cattle, it might make sense to have the water tested just to make sure that that's not a source of complication.
Okay, great. Great. All right. Well, Chris, we've come to the just about the end here. So, on our next show, we may be talking about some chicken problems or issues coming about.
Yeah, absolutely.
To watch for, I guess.
To watch for it, and again, it doesn't matter whether you're a commercial producer of chickens, whether that be layers or eggs, or whether you have some in your backyard to provide for your own family. There is a virus coming around that I think we need to raise awareness of, and we'll talk about biosecurity and viruses, and it might sound an awful lot like COVID.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, all right. So until next time, Chris, Dwayne, we'll see you next month on Farming in Ohio.
Have a great month.